The air in the gym hung thick with the smell of sweat and old leather. But it was the sudden chill from the promoter's words that really cut through everything. Bill, a man whose face usually wore a permanent scowl, stood with his arms crossed, his voice flat and final. "He's not ready. I'm canceling the fight." The declaration hit like a body blow, aimed straight at the young Cassius Clay. Just days before what everyone knew was a make-or-break bout. Bill's eyes narrowed as he looked at Clay. "He's too green, too loud, too much of a risk," he muttered, almost to himself, but loud enough for everyone to hear. It wasn't just a business decision, it was personal. You could feel his deep skepticism, his fear of anything that didn't fit into his neat, predictable world. Clay, who usually had a quick comeback for everything, took the hit. You could see it sting him. But then, slowly, a calm, almost unnerving smile spread across his face. His voice was low, barely a whisper, but it carried in the sudden silence. "You underestimate me, Bill." The news, or rather the threat of it, started to spread like wildfire through Clay's small camp. It was a ripple effect that threatened to turn into a tidal wave. Months of grueling training, of early mornings and late nights of pushing his body to its limits, all of it suddenly hung in the balance. His burgeoning reputation, built on a string of impressive wins and even more impressive self-promotion, felt like it could unravel at any moment. The full weight of this potential setback, the real consequences of Bill's decision, hadn't even fully settled in yet. Everyone knew that some fires are meant to burn brighter when doused with doubt. This felt like one of those times. Clay just turned and walked away from Bill, not saying another word. He didn't storm out, didn't yell, didn't even look back. He just walked, his destination unknown, leaving everyone in his wake to wonder. What was his next move? Would he fight back against Bill, or would he just fade away? The gym, usually a hive of activity, was eerily quiet, filled with unspoken questions and a heavy sense of uncertainty. It was clear this wasn't just about one fight. It was about everything. It was about respect, about belief, and about the sheer force of will that defined Cassius Clay. Before we continue with this story, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We've got so many more untold stories from the world of boxing and beyond. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our global audience. Your support keeps these stories coming. Now, back to Cassius Clay, standing at a crossroads, with his entire career hanging by a thread, all because one man decided he wasn't ready. He had a choice to make, and whatever it was, it would change everything. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, and everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what the young fighter would do next. Our story really starts in Louisville, Kentucky, in the early 1960s. This wasn't just any city. It was a vibrant, bustling place, but also one deeply marked by segregation. For a young black man like Cassius Clay, Louisville was home, a place of close-knit families and strong community ties, but also a constant reminder of the lines drawn by race. The streets buzzed with life, the sounds of jazz often drifting from open windows, mixing with the everyday chatter of neighbors. Kids played stickball in the alleys, women gossiped on front porches, and men gathered at the barber shops, talking politics and sports. Cassius grew up in this world, a world where the rhythm of daily life was set by church on Sundays, school during the week, and work to put food on the table. For many young men, the local boxing gyms offered a path, a way to channel energy and ambition. These gyms, often tucked away in less than glamorous buildings, were sanctuaries. They smelled of liniment, sweat, and hope. It was here that Clay first laced up gloves, first felt the power of his fists, and first heard the roar of a crowd. The social norms of the time were clear. Young black men were expected to work hard, stay out of trouble, and, if they were lucky, maybe find a stable job. But Clay was never one for expectations. He was charismatic even then, a natural showman with a magnetic personality. He was confident, sometimes boastful, and had a way of drawing attention to himself, whether he was in the ring or just walking down the street. His community loved him for it, seeing in him a reflection of their own dreams and resilience. He was also growing up at a time when the civil rights movement was gaining real momentum, and the air was thick with calls for equality and justice. This environment, both supportive and challenging, shaped the young Cassius, giving him a voice and a purpose far beyond the boxing ring. Then there was Bill, the promoter. He came from a different world entirely. Bill represented the established order, the predominantly white boxing hierarchy that controlled the sport. He was a businessman, plain and simple, and his initial interest in Clay was purely financial. He saw the talent, the raw power, and the potential to make a lot of money. He saw Clay as an investment, a commodity to be managed and marketed. But beneath that calculated interest, there was always a layer of skepticism. Bill didn't quite understand Clay, and what he didn't understand, he didn't fully trust. From early on, there were subtle instances of this disconnect, these brewing tensions. Bill would often dismiss Clay's outspokenness, his playful taunts, and his unconventional style as mere antics. You'd see it in his eyes, a flicker of annoyance, or a quick, dismissive wave of the hand when Clay would declare himself the greatest to anyone who would listen. Bill would make curt remarks, telling Clay to tone it down or to focus on the fighting, not the talking. He wanted a fighter who fit the mold, who was respectful, quiet, and predictable. Clay, however, was none of those things. These small cues, these unspoken disagreements, were the early signs of a clash that was bound to happen. Bill wanted to control the narrative, but Clay was already writing his own. The relationship between Cassius Clay and Bill, the promoter, had never been truly solid. It was more like a bridge built on shaky ground, each interaction adding another crack. Over time, those cracks widened, revealing a deeper chasm of misunderstanding and disrespect. Bill saw Clay as a wild horse that needed breaking, a talent to be harnessed and directed, not a partner with his own vision. There were countless small humiliations, little cuts that added up. Clay would often recall how Bill would promise him specific training equipment, maybe a new speed bag, or better sparring partners, only for those promises to vanish into thin air. Sometimes, Clay would arrive at the gym expecting a certain setup, ready to work on a particular skill, only to find Bill had prioritized another fighter, someone Bill considered more professional or dependable. Clay's ambitious declarations, his bold predictions about future opponents, were never met with encouragement from Bill. Instead, Bill would often just scoff, a dismissive sound that said, "You're just a kid talking big." He'd tell Clay, "Focus on showing up, not showing off," as if Clay's confidence was a flaw, not a strength. Bill particularly disliked Clay's unique training methods. Clay loved to shadow box in front of a mirror, talking to himself, practicing his rhymes, moving with a grace that was uncommon for a heavyweight. Bill would sometimes walk in, shake his head, and mumble something about wasting time or not being serious. He'd push Clay towards more conventional, grueling drills, not understanding that Clay's mental preparation was just as vital as his physical one. Once, after Clay had won a local fight with a spectacular, unconventional move, Bill pulled him aside, not to praise but to criticize. "You got lucky," he'd said. "Don't try that fancy stuff again. Stick to the basics." Clay remembered feeling a cold knot in his stomach. The joy of his victory quickly fading under Bill's disapproval. Another time, Bill had openly questioned Clay's dedication in front of other trainers, making a joke about Clay spending too much time preaching and not enough time punching. Clay had just started exploring his spiritual path, and Bill's sarcastic remarks felt like a direct attack on a deeply personal part of his life. Clay had just stood there, jaw tight, trying to keep his composure. He knew Bill didn't understand, and probably didn't care to. Bill saw Clay's outspokenness not as authenticity, but as a liability, something that could alienate sponsors and the public. He constantly tried to temper Clay's personality, to smooth out the edges, to make him fit into a neat, marketable box. These repeated slights, the lack of genuine belief, the constant attempts to control and diminish him, slowly eroded Clay's patience. He came to view Bill with increasing cynicism. It wasn't just about boxing anymore. It was about respect, about being seen for who he truly was, not just for what he could do in the ring. The initial incident, the threat to cancel the fight, wasn't some random outburst. It was the culmination of years of emotional strain, of conflicting visions for Clay's career, and a deep-seated clash of personalities. Bill's skepticism wasn't new. It had been simmering for a long time, and Clay had felt its heat in countless small moments. It was the moment all those little cuts became one big wound. The friction between Clay and Bill, once subtle jabs, now became open warfare. Their arguments grew louder, more frequent, echoing through the usually quiet gym. Clay, no longer content to just absorb Bill's snide remarks, started pushing back hard. He'd stand his ground, his voice rising to meet Bill's, refusing to let the promoter dictate his identity or his future. "You want me to be a robot, Bill?" Clay once shot back. His eyes narrowed, during a heated exchange in Bill's cramped office. "You want me to just train, fight, and shut up? That's not me. I'm more than just a fighter." Bill, his face reddening, would bang his fist on the desk. "You're a product, Clay. My product. And you're messing it up with all your loudmouth nonsense." He'd try to explain how Clay's outspokenness, his predictions, his poetic boasts, were alienating potential investors and the more conservative elements of the boxing establishment. But Clay wouldn't budge. He believed in his words just as much as he believed in his fists. He saw his personality as an extension of his fighting style, a way to get into his opponent's heads before he even stepped into the ring. Bill just saw it as a liability, a loose cannon he couldn't control. This constant back and forth wasn't happening in a vacuum. Clay's family, especially his mother, Odessa, and his father, Cassius Sr., worried about the path he was taking. They loved his confidence, but they also lived in a society where a young black man, especially one with ambition and a public platform, needed to be careful. They'd gently advise him, "Son, sometimes it's better to keep your thoughts to yourself." They feared his confrontational style, his refusal to conform, might shut doors that were only just beginning to open for him. They'd seen too many promising lives cut short, too many dreams crushed by stepping out of line. On the other side, Bill faced his own set of pressures. Other promoters, the old guard, would call him, questioning his judgment in backing such an unconventional fighter. "He's a hothead, Bill," they'd say. "You're going to lose a lot of money on that one." Investors, too, were hesitant. They liked the idea of a rising star, but not one who came with so much perceived baggage, so much potential for controversy. Bill saw Clay not just as a financial asset, but as a risk to his own reputation within the tightly knit, often conservative, world of boxing. He felt caught between Clay's undeniable talent and his equally undeniable refusal to be managed. The escalating friction wasn't just confined to their private meetings. Others in the boxing world noticed. Trainers would exchange glances when Clay and Bill's voices carried through the gym walls. Journalists, always looking for a story, started picking up on the tension, asking subtle questions, observing the strained interactions. There were whispers of trouble in Clay's camp, murmurs about whether this young, brash fighter would ever truly make it with such a volatile relationship with his promoter. Some saw it as a sign of Clay's immaturity, others as Bill's inability to handle a unique talent. Everyone was watching, silently judging. Clay, amidst all this, was reaching his emotional limit. He felt misunderstood, constantly battling not just his opponents in the ring, but also the very people who were supposed to be on his team. The gym, once a sanctuary of ambition and hard work, now felt heavy, oppressive. The smell of sweat and old leather, the rhythmic thud of punching bags, everything that once motivated him, now just amplified his internal struggle. The anticipation of the upcoming fight, now hanging by a thread because of Bill's threat, added another layer of psychological burden. He needed this fight, not just for his career, but to prove to himself, and to Bill, that he was ready. He was more than ready. He was destined for something bigger, something Bill, with all his traditional views, simply couldn't see. The decisive moment arrived, not with a whimper, but with a roar. Bill's threat to cancel the fight, intended to bring Clay to heel, instead ignited something fierce inside him. Clay listened to Bill's arguments, the same old complaints about being too loud, too unmanageable, too much of a risk. But this time, something was different. There was a quiet resolve in Clay's eyes that Bill mistook for submission. Instead of pleading, instead of backing down, Clay did the unexpected. He walked out of Bill's office, not to sulk, but to act. He called a press conference, not with Bill's approval, but entirely on his own terms. The room was packed, a mix of skeptical journalists and curious onlookers. Bill, hearing of it, rushed over, expecting to shut it down to control the narrative. But he was too late. Clay stepped up to the microphone, his posture radiating a confidence that bordered on defiance. He didn't just argue, he made a public declaration that would echo for decades. "Bill says I'm not ready," Clay stated, his voice calm but powerful. "Bill says I'm too green. But let me tell you something. The greatest is not made by timid men. The greatest is made by courage." He then did something nobody expected. He announced that he was taking control of his own promotional aspects, forming his own team, and that the fight, with or without Bill, would happen. He challenged Bill directly, not with anger, but with an almost surgical precision that exposed the promoter's fears. "You're afraid of what you can't control, Bill, but you can't control greatness." This act wasn't just a response to Bill. It was a manifesto. It was an impassioned, public declaration of self-belief that went viral before the term even existed. It was a spontaneous, undeniable display of skill, not just with his fists, but with his words and his will. He didn't just talk about being the greatest. He started acting like it, even outside the ring. He didn't just want to win fights. He wanted to win on his own terms. This event exposed Bill's true motivations. It wasn't just about protecting his investment. It was about his fear of losing control, his inability to comprehend a talent that defied traditional molds. Bill wanted a fighter he could mold, a product he could package. Clay was an artist, an innovator, and he refused to be confined. For Clay, it was the raw, undeniable realization that he could not compromise his authentic self for the sake of a promoter's approval or anyone else's. The path Bill laid out for him was one of conformity, and Clay knew, deep in his bones, that conformity would stifle the very essence of who he was meant to become. Clay made a drastic decision right there, in front of the world. He decided to forge his own path, asserting his independence and control over his career and image, regardless of Bill's involvement. This wasn't just about severing ties. It was about a public statement that effectively neutralized Bill's power and influence over his career. It was a true breaking of the pattern of external control he had endured. He wouldn't be managed. He would lead. He wouldn't be told what to say. He would speak his truth. He wouldn't be a pawn. He would be the king of his own destiny. This moment was a powerful assertion of identity and self-worth, a realistic and emotionally resonant decision that set the stage for his future greatness. It was the moment Cassius Clay truly became Muhammad Ali, long before the name change, in spirit and in action. He stood there, a young man, barely out of his teens, defying the established order. And in doing so, he began to write his own legend. The immediate aftermath of Clay's declaration was electric. The fight, initially hanging by a thread, was now on. But it was no longer Bill's fight to promote. The boxing world, initially stunned, quickly adapted. Other promoters, sensing a shift in the power dynamic and the emergence of a new kind of star, stepped in to facilitate the event, eager to be associated with this defiant young talent. Clay, with his newly formed loyal team, moved forward with an almost palpable surge of energy. He trained harder, spoke louder, and carried himself with an even greater sense of purpose. The fight itself became more than just a boxing match. It was a testament to his unwavering conviction, a living, breathing metaphor for his triumph over doubt and control. When Clay stepped into the ring, the atmosphere was charged. Every punch he threw, every dodge, every taunt directed at his opponent felt like a direct answer to Bill's earlier dismissal. He didn't just win, he dominated, displaying a fluidity and power that left no room for argument. It was a spectacular performance, a masterclass in boxing, and a definitive statement. He had proven Bill wrong, not just with words, but with his fists, and in front of the entire world. The reactions around him were varied but telling. His loyal trainers, who had seen his struggles and believed in his vision, rallied behind him with renewed conviction. They saw their faith repaid, their long hours in the gym justified. His family, initially concerned about his confrontational approach, now beamed with pride and relief. They understood that this path, however unconventional, was his truth. Others, those who had quietly sided with Bill or remained neutral, now expressed a mixture of awe and regret. Journalists who had once dismissed his boasts now scrambled to call him a phenomenon. Even some of Bill's former associates began to question their loyalty, seeing the undeniable force of nature that was Cassius Clay. Bill himself faced the quiet but undeniable repercussions of his misjudgment. His reputation took a hit. His inability to recognize and nurture Clay's unique talent, coupled with his attempt to suppress it, became a black mark against his name. The very cancellation that Bill had threatened, intended to sideline Clay, inadvertently became the catalyst for his true ascent. Bill's attempt to hold him back instead propelled him into a brighter spotlight, making him the greatest earlier and more emphatically than anyone, including Bill, could have imagined. His professional standing diminished, not with a bang, but with the quiet fading of influence, overshadowed by the very star he tried to extinguish. Clay's victory was not just in the ring. It was in reclaiming his narrative, his identity, and his destiny. Years later, reflecting on that pivotal moment, Muhammad Ali, as he was then known, would often speak of it. He'd recall the burning frustration, the feeling of being underestimated, and the quiet resolve that solidified his path. He understood that true greatness wasn't just about physical prowess. It was about the strength of conviction, the courage to stand alone, and the unwavering belief in oneself. Even when everyone else, especially those who were supposed to support you, doubted your potential. That moment of defiance against Bill wasn't just a fight for a boxing match. It was a fight for his soul, a battle he won long before he ever stepped into the ring. It taught him that the biggest opponent isn't always across from you in the ring. Sometimes it's the doubt sown by others, and the only way to beat it is to believe in your own fire.